Good evening. Am I audible? Okay, great. And welcome to the Jit Paul Memorial Lecture at the Apeejay Kolkata Literary Festival in 2026. This annual lecture has given us the opportunity of listening to some of the foremost thinkers and authors of our time. And it's held every year in the memory of the late Jit Paul, who was a man of boundless curiosity, a ceaseless seeker of knowledge, and the premium that he put on education can be seen in the schools that he founded and in the values of criticality, integrity, service, and humility that he constantly sought to inculcate. And it's that spirit which permeates the question that we are addressing today: are we a tolerant society? This sounds a simple enough question, and we are sort of intuitively, often we answer in the affirmative with a resounding yes, but when, we say this with confidence, even with pride, but when we place it in the broader context of heritage, history, and the matter of reconciliation, it becomes much more demanding and very complicated. And we have our distinguished speaker today is Shri Pavan Varma, who will bring a very varied experience to this question. He has been a diplomat representing India in the wider world. He is a prolific author, writing constantly on Indian cultural and philosophical traditions. And as a politician, he has been engaged very deeply with the practical realities of democratic life. So through his public life and his writing, he has dwelt on very deeply about not only what we think of ourselves as a civilization, but how we behave as a society in general. So it is my honor to invite Shri Pavan Varma to deliver this year's Jit Paul Memorial Lecture on Are We a Tolerant Society? Heritage, History, and Reconciliation. So, ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Shri Pavan Varma.
Thank you, Jayanta. It's a great honor and privilege to deliver the Jit Paul Memorial Lecture. Mr. Paul was an iconic entrepreneur, a businessman with vision, who in a way was one of the co-architects of the Apeejay Surendra group. And this lecture in his memory, as an annual institution, and my opportunity to be a speaker today, delivering it, is a matter of great pride to me. Thank you so much. The subject before us is, are we a tolerant society? Our natural assumption is that we are, and partly we are. But I think we should begin by defining tolerance. Tolerance is not merely coexistence. Tolerance is the ability to accept with respect other points of view, to look upon the other, if there is anything such as the other, as one of our own, and to move away from inflexible certitudes to the point of exclusion. Because when we are bound by a belief that only what we believe is right, it is bound to breed intolerance. So it is an attitude, an approach, a sentiment, far more than a vocabulary definition of it. And either societies have it or they have laws that ensure it. But spontaneously, in response to the question, are we a tolerant society? Perhaps we don't confront ourselves with it as often as we need to. In theory, I think the foundations of our civilization, as I was talking about in the morning, now there is a scientific basis to believe that they go back 7,000 to 8,000 years. And in theory, we have very strong foundations of the acceptance of tolerance. The first written text we have is the Rig Veda, which is now dated on the basis of scientific research based on the river Saraswati. I don't have time to go into it. But to be not 1500 BCE, but somewhere around 4000 BCE. We are talking now almost 7,000, 8,000 years old. And in the Rig Veda, there is a remarkable section which is called the Nasidya Sukta. And if you read it, you understand partly why the beginnings of our foundational thought were eclectic, open, tolerant, because there was skepticism, there was questioning, there was openness, there was query. For instance, the Nasidya Sukta says about the beginning of the universe, who really knows? Who will here proclaim it? Whence was it produced? Whence is this creation? The gods come afterwards with the creation of this universe. Who knows then whence it has arisen? Whence this creation has arisen, perhaps it formed itself, or perhaps it did not. The one who knows looks down on it in the highest heaven, only he knows, or perhaps he does not. Now, when you have the beginnings of all thought, at least in terms of the recorded history, where you have not a diktat, not a prescriptive command, not a fiat, but a search, as I said, an exploration, an invitation to ideation. You are preparing the ground for a level of tolerance at the theoretical level which is manifest. You are not saying that this is right because I know, and therefore if you don't believe in what I say is right, therefore I cannot tolerate you. We are saying, what is it? In its search, you too are asked the question, and I too am asked the question. And therefore, with such beginnings, it is not unexpected that, and I'm going to slightly abbreviate what I'm trying to say because I want to cover a larger canvas. We have in the Upanishads, among the greatest philosophical documents, I think, of the world, I'm picking out 3 Mahavakyas about which I'd referred to in the morning, which I have picked up because they are indicative of a spirit of tolerance, which was nothing short of revolutionary for that age. For instance, when the Upanishads say, Ekam Sat Vipraha Bahuda Vadanti, the truth is one, the wise people call it by different names. It's a revolutionary thought. Because this is the time when people were settling down in tribal communities, insecure, fragile, and the general belief was that what I believe in is the truth. Not that people can call it by different names. So it's a revolutionary thought, and it is again a remarkable symbol of the tolerance of the difference of opinions. When in the Upanishads, and as I was mentioning again this morning, the first thing when you enter parliament is you see at the gate, not that many parliamentarians read that now or understand what it means. It says, Udar Charitanam Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam. For the big-hearted, the entire world is one family. Again, it's a revolutionary thought because in the historical circumstances when this was written, the general belief was that those who are part of my tribe, my world, are important, and those who are outside it are, if not strangers, opponents. And to have the thought that no, for the big-hearted, the entire world is your family. Udara Charitanam Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam. Similarly, and I think of this often, especially now when we seem to be somehow treading a razor-thin line between acceptability and non-acceptability of what you believe is right, when there is a fear in our mind sometimes to state what we believe is right because of the consequences that may befall it. A third sentence that I pick upon is Ano Bhadraha Kritavo Yantu Vishvata. Let good thoughts flow to me from all directions. Now, it seems a almost banal kind of statement. But as I stressed then, it was a revolutionary thought because the prevailing system at that time was that what I believe in is what should insulate us from the possible dilution of authority in our own citadels. And here they are saying, let good thoughts flow from all directions. Now, obviously, this very sentiment incorporates in itself an attitude of tolerance, which is the foundational strength of our civilization. Similarly, as examples of this approach, because it is on these foundations that there was the evolution of Indian thought. In the Hindu faith, at that time, which was the only faith really, Buddhism and Jainism came later, there is not one but 6 systems of philosophy. And some of you may be surprised that technically they can all be called atheist because there is not a single mention of God. All the 6 systems are trying to find what could be the ultimate truth underlying the bewildering plurality of this cosmos. So they are not talking of God, they are talking of what could be the truth. And of course, among these 6 systems, the Advait school or the Vedanta school became the most powerful. But there was Nyaya, there was Vaisheshik, there was Samkhya, there was Yoga, there was Purv Mimansh, there was Uttar Mimansh. And Uttar Mimansh is Advait, and Advait is Vedanta. So, there was not one but 6 systems of Hindu philosophy, but even more remarkably, the Hindu faith was sufficiently reassured not to be provoked into intolerance when there were schools outside these six systems which openly questioned its basic tenets. The Charvak school and the Lokanayat school of Charvak, nothing in Indian philosophy is superficially argued. It's a very rigorous school, which is the material school, which says, जो प्रत्यक्ष है, वही प्रमाण है. What you see is, what you don't doesn't exist. The Charvak school could say that the Vedas are a bunch of lies. Preceding Marx, as I was mentioning, by several thousand years, when he said religion is the opium of the masses, the Charvak said that the Vedas are a bunch of lies because they are used by the Brahmanical class to beguile ordinary Indians, gullible Indians, into falling into their trap. Now here is a school, the Charvaks, who are questioning the Shruti, not the Smriti. The Vedas are considered to be Shrutis. That which have come not from the human mind but from a divine source, they are saying they are a bunch of lies and they are a part of Hinduism. The Tantric school is a part of Hinduism. And then later you found the rise of two remarkable religions, Buddhism and Jainism. Buddhism denies the fundamental of the Advaitic school, which is Atma. Buddhism, Gautam Buddha, for all the statues and temples that have been built for him, was a remarkable mind. I mean, his essential belief was all form is emptiness, all emptiness is form. What is nirvana? Nothingness. You come from nothingness, you are nothingness, you go into nothingness. There is nothing that precedes you or follows you. There is no Atma, there is no soul, there is no Brahm. And Buddhism, with these beginnings, was patronized by Hindu kings. The Buddhist viharas, there was some violence with, but it's so minimalistic because history shows that Buddhist viharas had Hindu kings as patrons. Nalanda, which I've just visited, was largely a Buddhist university or Vishwavidyalaya, but its patrons were the Guptas and the Palak dynasties, who set aside funds, lands and stipends in a very large corpus to maintain it. And Jainism too. So obviously there was that spirit of tolerance. And please remember why I'm stressing the foundational aspects to begin with so much, because we have to contrast it with the evolution and the ups and downs of this graph of tolerance. There is a history because we are talking of a 7,000-year period. The three foundational texts of the Hindu faith were dialogic. The Upanishads are a dialogue. The Bhagavad Gita is a dialogue. And the third text, which not everyone is familiar with, which is absolutely brilliant, are the Brahma Sutras, which are aphorisms, compressed thought, on which thousands and thousands of pages of tika, tippani, commentaries are written. And the Brahma Sutra in the commentaries will always have the opponent's point of view. The writer who's writing the commentary will give his point of view, but he will not arrive to a synthesized conclusion without admitting the opponent's point of view. So there is essentially a dialogic basis to the foundational evolution of our civilization. Now, there are two areas where, in the short canvas I have for this lecture, there was intolerance, but that also developed around the 1st century CE, AD, BCE, the turn of the millennium. And that is where caste hierarchies are concerned and women. Today, scientific research shows, on the basis of skeletal DNA analysis, that prior to this period, while there were the forecasts, there were intermarriages, there was interchange of professions between them. But this somehow congealed into an institutional system of hierarchy around the turn of that millennial. And subsequently, we have seen that with such foundations of tolerance, where the founding fathers themselves admit of the differences of opinion and differences of status, etc., you had a situation where you had an institutionalized system of oppression, discrimination, and exploitation inherent in the caste system. Now, that is certainly intolerant. So, if we try to mask an answer to the question, are we a tolerant society, by quoting only the gospel and the truth and the theoretical foundations, we have to also confront the realities of lived life. There is intolerance in the working of the caste system, and there is intolerance in the manner in which women have been treated for the last 2,500 years at least. As you know, famously, the Manusmriti is not entirely a consistent document. But the Manusmriti certainly speaks about the almost divine validation of the inferiority of women to men. That they are forever appendages either of their fathers, their husbands, or their sons. And this aspect of gender bias continues, although in a reduced form, even today. So here now we have a contrasting picture to answer the question, are we a tolerant society? And then, if we move on, the first time we saw the practice of intolerance on a wide scale on the basis of the religion was at the time of the Turkic invasion of India. Islam had come to India's borders peacefully earlier through traders, as had Christianity. But with the organized in Turkic invasions of India, there is no point in glossing over the realities of history. Will Durant has called that period one of the bloodiest chapters of world history. They were proselytizers. They believed in their religion. They believed that those who did not believe were not true believers. There was destruction of temples and centers of learning on a very wide scale, and there's no point trying to make it out as if, as some historians have, and I'm caricaturing it, that the invaders came in a tourist bus carrying some biryani, and we offered them some puri aloo, and we sat down and built a tolerant society. It didn't happen. It happened in spite of it. And for a long period of time. But let's face the truth. That was the truth. And one of the reasons why it happened is that the foundational strengths of this civilization were so strong that in spite of this invasion into the ideological premises of those beliefs, there was still the residual strength to assimilate subsequent to that event. Hinduism itself, when Islam came to Indonesia, it was an entirely Buddhist country. In 200 years, it became an almost entirely Muslim country. It didn't happen here. One of the reasons it didn't happen is a remarkably tolerant development post an intolerant invasion. And that is the beginning and lasting for 600 years of the Bhakti movement. From the cloistered sanctum sanctorums of Sanskrit and the privileged sections who read it and believed in it, or at least propagated it as universal truths, the religious faith and its thinking was taken to the masses in their own lingua franca on a pan-Indian scale and sustained for 600 years. I don't know why in our educational system we don't see what a remarkable period the Bhakti movement was. Across India, Maharashtra, Tukaram, Namdev, Chandidas, Vidyapati, Surdas, in Karnataka, Allama Prabhu, Basavanna, women, Mirabai, Antal, they all wrote in their own languages. And their hierarchies in their sects were not afflicted by gender bias or caste hierarchy. Some of the apex leadership of these movements, which eliminated ritual largely in preference to kirtans and devotional. It was bhakti. The whole thing was bhakti. And remarkable voices arose out of it. Kabir, Guru Nanak, they were all part of the bhakti movement. When Guru Nanak says, and today, even today, Vandchak, Langar, Seva, I mean, these were tenets that were exceptionally inclusive. Ik noor se sab jag upja. It is Vedantic thought but reinterpreted as a revolt against the hierarchic discriminations of the caste system. And to a great extent, these were very tolerant movements. And somewhere post the invasion of Islam, even Islam within this eclectic atmosphere grew roots to become, in a way, synthesized with this civilizational flow. What was later called the Ganga Jamuni Tehzeeb, where we borrowed something from them, they borrowed something from them, the Sufi movement arose. And under Akbar, by that time, there was a considerable degree of Indianization, who then had the Deen-e-Ilahi. Now, Deen-e-Ilahi, which was trying to have many faiths come together to discuss, does not mean that all bigotry had ended. But it just does show that the earlier degree of complete division had been partly bridged. Akbar himself, there is documentary evidence in the early part of his career, destroyed Hindu temples. And certainly there was a reaction in the reign of Jahangir to what Akbar's, according to the ulema, the mullahs, his heretic behavior in talking to other religious beliefs. There was a reaction against it, which culminated, I think, somewhere with Aurangzeb. But by and large, you had the Deen-e-Ilahi, and what is remarkable is people don't know, because now they see Lingayats and Vakaligas in Karnataka as vote banks only. The Lingayat movement was a very progressive movement. It eliminated caste hierarchies. It simplified ritual. It was a Shiva sect. And the Lingayats actually had in Kalyan, one of the kingdoms, there was a Kalyan Mantap where anybody could come and discuss any subject without any fetters on their ability to do so. The great Bhakti saint, Shiva's devotee, Akka, she went there, as this is written, she used to live in the cremation ground, worshipping Shiva. She went nude, just her tresses open, and was welcomed into the Kalyan Mandap and is supposed to have had a long dialogue with Allama Prabhu and Basavanna, the founders of the Lingayat movement. So even the Deen-e-Ilahi was preceded by such developments. But there was, during this period of the initial invasion, considerable intolerance. We survived it, and we survived it in spite of it to build a Ganga Jamnu Tehzeeb based on tolerance. Now we come to the partition. I'm sort of skipping periods of history to give examples to illustrate. For a civilization that prided itself on assimilation, antiquity, continuity, assimilation, diversity, and refinement, for such a civilization to go through partition and the horrific deaths that took place across the border, that border like a gash drawn across an arbitrary boundary, there was great intolerance in that. Perhaps circumstances were responsible for it, but there was great intolerance. I think there must have been few incidents in global history where there was such a mass displacement of people with such a high degree of sustained violence for months upon months. And these were again people who believed in their respective faiths, but were intolerant when it came to immediate provocation. Action, reaction, action, reaction. I mean, we are far from being insulated from the dip into intolerance. The point I'm making is that in spite of such remarkable foundations, the dip into intolerance is something as fragile as porcelain. We have to guard against it. We have seen it happen in recent history, and that was the partition. But in spite of the partition and subsequent to it, we built a constitution. And the constitution promised a tolerant society. In fact, guaranteed it. The right to freedom of expression, individual freedom, the right to dissent, the right to judicial remedy, and for religions, the freedom to practice, profess, and propagate their religions, the respect and recognition of all religions, legal guarantees against infringements. So the Constitution of India was once again a reassertion of that tolerance. And we have seen in the decades that have followed both a certain level of fealty, loyalty to that constitutional pledge, and completely unacceptable violations of it. So when we ask ourselves, are we a tolerant society? Do we ask ourselves what happened during the Sikh genocide in Delhi and adjoining areas? Was all this theoretical framework of tolerance so fragile that it was shattered? And perhaps as part of a conspiracy provoked into brutal violence so quickly? Are our beliefs so easily broken? These are questions we must ask ourselves. What happened subsequently in Gujarat? Irrespective of the provocation, the kind of wanton killing that followed, is that something in conformity with our traditions of tolerance? Now, these are the questions that we need to ask ourselves as we do it. Because what I want to say is to you that it's not that there is anything lacking in the genuine theoretical foundational beliefs that prop up, sustain, nurture, and project tolerance. It is how fragile it will be and is at all times in societies in flux. If Ghalib could say in the 19th century, हम मुवाहिद हैं हमारा केश है तरके रसूम, मिल्लतें जब मिट गईं अज़्ज़ाए ईमा हो गईं. हम मुवाहिद हैं, we are crusaders. हमारा केश है तरके रसूम. Our belief is to abjure rituals. When beliefs merge into each other, then there is truly the light of divinity. Ghalib could say this. He could mock mullahs. That was just in the 19th century. He died in 1869. In 1947, we had the partition. Just before a Mir went even further. Mir, whom Ghalib recognized as his ustad, Mir said, मीर के दीनों मजहब को पूछते क्या हो उनने तो कशका खींचा देर पे बैठा कब का तल्ख इस्लाम किया. What do you ask of Mir's beliefs? मीर के दीनों मजहब को पूछते क्या हो उनने तो, Mir has for a very long time sat on the threshold of the temple and for so long discarded Islam. These were Sufis. And they are writing less than 100 years before 1947, and 1947 and partition happens. So do we have something that is guaranteed or do we have something that is vulnerable? We have to ask ourselves. And I gave two recent examples from our history. So, therefore, what we are facing today is that the limits of tolerance are being tested because tolerance itself has become part of a political equation. I've been in politics, I am in politics. In the pursuit of electoral majorities, often the attempt is to deliberately stoke intolerance. And I'm not blaming any one side. People have used minority vote bank politics. Even more flagrantly, now we see majoritarian politics. We have got an entire movement to excavate temples, excavate mosques, to locate temples. There is a judgment of the Supreme Court that it should have stopped with the Ayodhya temple. But today, my own feeling is that even those who may believe in right of center validation of the Hindu faith have no longer under their control the forces they have unleashed. These are lumpen elements. I have no hesitation in saying here that, for instance, on the extreme right, the Bajrang Dal is a lumpen element. It is not susceptible to either discipline or theory. If you lock one of them up in a room and say you will be released after you write 2 pages on the essence of Hinduism, all of them will remain in prison for life. But they are useful instruments. They are used, and when they make an excess, you distance yourself from it. And I have discussed this openly with the RSS. When I wrote The Great Hindu Civilization, I was talking to Dattaji, Dattatreya Hosbale, who said, I've read your book verbatim. And then he said to me, he quoted a page number to me, page 300 and something, where he said, you couldn't have put forward the greatness of Hindu civilization, but after that you begin to critique us. Not him, but critique it. And I said, yes, because excess by anyone is wrong and is a threat to tolerance. Extreme Islam is a threat to tolerance. Extreme Hinduism is a threat to tolerance. We have to be vigilant about it. We have seen in the past that even on such strong foundations of tolerance, within decades that tolerance can break into a anarchy of intolerance. So it's something we need to protect and guard and be vigilant about and be aware and protect. We live in fragile times. And it cannot be tokenistic. It must be backed by belief, where tolerance must embrace. Even if there are disagreements, it must try to co-opt, to create a respectful compromise, because that is the only way India will survive. India will survive when all its communities, all its diversities flourish as part of one. Believing in the principle Udara Charitanam, Vasudev Kutumbakam, because if we don't, I'll end with another couplet which has just come to my mind. Aag na teri hai na meri hai. This fire is not yours or mine. Aag na meri hai na teri hai. Aag ko mat de hawa. राख अगर मेरा घर हुआ तो तेरा घर देखेगा कौन. राख अगर मेरा घर हुआ तो तेरा घर देखेगा कौन. We live together, we must live and die together, but live in a manner and a spirit of tolerance. Then we can say we are a tolerant society. Thank you so much.
Thank, thank you so much, Mr. Varma, for that extremely inspiring and also provocative lecture. And you as a student of history, I was fascinated because I remembered the page of dedication in one of the most famous books of history. It's a book on the permanent settlement written by the famous historian Ranajit Guha, called The Rule of Property for Bengal. And on that dedication page, it just said, to my teacher, Professor Sushovan Chandra Sarkar, who stoked the first doubts. And you showed us that historically, such a sweeping view of history, that we have always sustained a doubt, like all of this skepticism and the absence of certitudes in our ancient traditions, not like, and then God said, let there be light, and all was light. It was uncertainties, skepticism, and all that. And we have survived great and very violent encounters by bringing forth our values of assimilation. We have survived the initial violence of the Turkic encounter by building a culture of assimilation. And right in the wake of partition, we created a constitution which is now often under threat, the constitution's values, but we made a synthesis that made toleration possible. And you showed us that we have the building blocks in our own culture and in our own tradition to make tolerance sustainable. So it's not something that we inherit and take for granted rather absent-mindedly, but it is something, tolerance is something that we must sustain with all the care that we can muster. Thank you so much for giving us this thought, and I'm sure we will all carry this thought with us as we go beyond this space. And on that note of careful optimism, ladies and gentlemen, please join me in thanking Sri Pavan K. Varma.